If there is one thing I can say, is that the man of the hour won the day, the week, and the year. Welcome to Creating Understanding Episode 3, Beginning the Path to Victory.
So you asked, are there any places that the Vice President is overperforming Joe Biden in 2020? So we could show you that as well. We just bring that out here. Harris overperforming in 2020.
Holy smokes.
There you go. So let this go away and see if there's anything on the east side there.
Literally nothing?
Literally nothing.
Literally not one county?
It's beautiful. I've looked at this for 5 hours now.
Oh no! What happened? Oh no! How terrible! That's just awful! How terrible! Oh no!
It's beautiful.
Literally nothing?
Literally nothing.
Literally not one county?
Anyway, back to more serious matters. So, as I was saying, I believe some congratulations are in order. It's not only that Trump won the presidency in 2024, but it appears that the Republicans also won the Senate, for sure, and they are on the winning path to the House of Representatives of the United States. Very good. As I said, congratulations are in order. We laughed, we celebrated, but I want to discuss something more serious today. Many people on the right did believe that this was going to be the end result. However, there is an attitude, especially in political circles, about the futility of voting and the caliber of candidates which we are given to choose between during elections. For this, I will be responding to a video by Leather Apron Club, who, right in the day before the election, despite him being an admitted right-winger, he made a video about don't vote. So, let's see what he has to say. I will offer some corrections and a shift in mindset, which is very, very detrimental to any right-wing movement. I do not want LAC to stop. I want him to be a better version of himself. Take it away.
Don't vote. And no, right off the bat, this is not a satire video. I'm earnestly telling you that it may not be in your best interest to vote this election cycle. I'm mostly talking to conservatives and right-wingers here, but know that this could apply to both sides. But why should we abstain from voting? Many of you will already be thinking of one of a number of canned responses to what I've said so far in this video. Voting is your civic duty. We have to vote for the lesser of two evils. If you don't vote, then you can't complain about who gets elected and so on and so forth. But these and many others fail to address what is the key issue here, which is that to vote for a candidate is to assent to their platform.
Now, me personally, I would be at the top of a list of the people who don't need to be told that voting is unimportant. There are many elements of politics which point to it being this way. There's no secret that I'm a monarchist, so of course I know this. In fact, if it were up to me, I would have absolutely zero problem if Trump abolished the 22nd Amendment. I could even say that I back Baron Trump as becoming the first king of the United States before the age of 35, but that's up to them. Anyway, LAC said something interesting there.
To vote for a candidate is to assent to their platform, to signal to those running their campaign that you approve of the messaging that they have put out.
I'll give him this. It's nice that he wants to win and to be well represented. The problem is that we live under liberal governments. And one of their properties is that you already consent to being governed unless you leave or you form your own government. Under liberalism, you can leave a country at pretty much any time. But just in case you doubt me that liberal philosophy really is saying this, here's from John Locke's Second Treatise of Government, section 121. But since the government has direct jurisdiction over the land and reaches the possessor of it before he has actually incorporated himself in the society, only as he dwells upon and enjoys that, the obligation anyone is under by virtue of such enjoyment to submit to the government begins and ends with the enjoyment, so that whenever the owner, who has given nothing but such a tacit consent to the government, will by donation, sale or otherwise quit the said possession, he is at liberty to go and incorporate himself into any other commonwealth, or to agree with others to begin a new one, in vacuis locis, in any part of the world they can find free and unpossessed, whereas he that has once, by actual agreement, and any express declaration given his consent to be of any commonwealth, is perpetually and indispensably obliged to be and remain unalterably subject to it, and can never be again in the liberty of the state of nature, unless, by any calamity, the government he was under comes to be dissolved, or else by some public act cuts him off from being any longer a member of it. In other words, by simply taking part of the cultural and economic life provided by the order of a governmental organization, you consent to being governed by it, even in times of crisis. However, I know that LAC referred more to a party platform, and there are better ways to address that.
It's not at all an original thought to say that modern-day conservatives are the liberals of 10 years ago, and for good reason. Every election, you're presented with two candidates, both of which march ever onwards towards more and more liberalism. Now, if you examine each election by itself, without regard to larger and slower trends in politics, the choice will always be obvious. If you're a conservative, then the Republican Party is always going to align more closely with your values than will the Democratic one. So you will feel obligated to put the Republican in power, if for nothing else than to avoid putting the Democrat in power. You may even dislike the Republican candidate or platform, but you will inevitably come to the conclusion that it would be foolish not to vote for the lesser of two evils. The loop will then come to a close when, in 4 to 8 years, when things have gotten even more woke, you're forced to choose another Republican candidate, more liberal than the last, but still not nearly as liberal as the new Democratic candidate.
Oh, I know this one. It's the overtone window. Hold up, let me go search for it. Found it. Now, the shift of the overtone window. The idea that politics are shifting leftward and the same position on the right remaining constant today will seem 10, 20, 30 years in the future to have shifted rightward or to be even far right. Is this true? Yes. Just take a look on any issue. What does the right want? Less immigration? The number of migrants increases. More religion? Religiosity decreases. Less government? The size of the government expands. Free speech? We have more hate speech law year by year. You literally just need to pay attention to the news at all, and this will be obvious. I don't even need to bring in the stats. And each time the left is in power, it reinforces its hold on it. Every time the right is in power, it gains a little bit back and then loses more. Yes, this happens. The left likes to pretend that it rages against the machine, but it's the machine that clears the path for the left. Now, why does this happen? Well, there are multiple reasons, and some of them I will be discussing in the future in Lessons in Political Maturity, but there are two ones I want to mention right now. The first and more minor one is the conservative attitude. Each generation of conservatives is used to a certain state of things, and when they enter politics, they try to reenact that thing. The problem is that the revolutionaries always fight for their revolution, to normalize something, to instate some new power to themselves. So each generation of conservatives has a larger status quo which was reinforced with the ideas of the left. The second and more major reason is the fact that the right does not have a vision. It does not know what its foundation is, what it's aiming towards, what it wants to maximize. Thankfully, I did address some of this, half to be precise, in one of my videos I already released, and I'll be linking it right now. I discuss what makes the political split between the left and the right. It's already known that the left tries to maximize equality and to shift towards communism. But the distinction is not based on this. You'll have to watch that video in order to get my full answer. I will continue that idea with what guides the right in a different sense in chapter 6 of Lessons in Political Maturity 1, and I would say that that video will be more important than the one I've already released. However, let's get back to Leather Apron Club. he doesn't directly comment over the Overton window, but offers commentary on the quality of beliefs that the right supports. However, I found a little bit of commentary on this type of attitude.
Okay, Asteroidal Assassin says, I will say that I'm disappointed in the Muslims of Dearborn for electing Trump over Stein, or simply not voting. The dude just says that the magic funny words, and you forget that he's a Zionist. Is everyone just a sheep? Well, Trump is, Zionism was not on the ballot, Asteroidal Assassin. I hate to say this. This is what kind of frustrates me, is that when people vote in elections on issues that aren't on the ballot, like there's the Christian equivalent of this is like Lila Rose, right? She was I knew
Lila Rose, yeah.
It's Lila Rose. Okay, this is a person who's a big deal on the Catholic pro-life community from her arrival on the scene in 2012. And she was organizing like this anti-Trump protest vote because Trump wasn't sufficiently pro-life. Leela, abortion isn't on the ballot, right? It's not. The government does not put every issue on the ballot just because a candidate speaks words in that direction. It's kind of silly. It's like, I don't know. It's like betting on a football team because the same town has like a really strong basketball team. It's nuts. But anyway, and Zionism was not on the ballot. Both candidates were Zionists. The policy wouldn't have largely changed. I think Trump is the better bet for stopping the war in Gaza, and that's actually something that I really, really hope Trump does. I want him to stop these insane bloodbaths. I can't stand seeing a generation of young men tossed into a meat grinder for neocon blather.
Leather Apron Club is a video essay channel, and he makes less than a video per month? And this is what you chose after 4 months of absence? Sorry. I was just saying that when you do a video essay, you want to focus to have some staying power, some ideas which will affect the platform for a long while. So you can't exactly focus on the minutiae of everyday news. That being said, because they don't follow news and they have a low upload schedule, this means that the number of things they can recommend us taking political action is very limited. Which leads into his criticism that the politicians don't do what he wants. Well, you're not the kind of channel which gives in detailed instruction on the kind of political actions to make yourself more effective. The only examples you give in your own video are, how should I say this politely, they are platitudes.
And know that this section isn't meant to demotivate listeners or to dissuade them from taking political action. Rather, it's meant to motivate us towards action, only by other, more effective, and admittedly more difficult means than voting. You could do practically anything else political. Volunteer, work in government, attend a protest, heck, make a YouTube channel if you want, and it would be a far greater fulfillment of your civic duty than voting. And all of these things can be done more than one day every 2 years. And I want to end this video by again saying that whether or not you agree with me on the ineffectiveness of voting, we should all agree that it cannot be our only form of political engagement. In the best case scenario, it is extremely passive when compared to volunteering, helping with campaigns, or engaging in whatever other legitimate form of political action you can think of. Even reading a book by yourself will undoubtedly have a much larger political impact than a single vote in your deep red or deep blue state. If you'd like to engage in political life, then by all means go and vote. But maybe at the same time, pick up a copy of the Federalist Papers. Or, memes aside, start with the Greeks. Even a cursory reading of Plato will put you miles ahead of your peers who only passively consume these lame political podcasts.
Those of you who watched my previous video probably chuckled at the last suggestion. You should know by now that politics are a dynamic affair. You cannot learn your way into having defeated your opponent. The things you will learn in history and politics books, especially those you recommended which are decades or centuries old, will be about the institutions which are decades or centuries out of date. They may inspire the current institutions, but you are not guaranteed that the institution you read about and the institution you are trying to change politically match. This especially matters for dissidents, because you don't know how the institution helps either the dominant culture or left-wing causes which you are against. Giving generalist knowledge doesn't help those who have no experience into getting more involved. I would recommend either increasing your upload frequency and talking more about practical political matters, or including more of these experiences into your content. People aim towards voting because they're not familiar enough with other avenues of action. Someone who incorporates knowledge of politics very well into their content, even though he's a religious channel, is Trent from the Counsel of Trent. I'll give an example.
A large contingent of self-described pro-lifers are really pro-choice on abortion. There's maybe a handful of people who are secretly pro-life but publicly pro-choice. That's not enough to balance out the harm of these many pseudo-pro-lifers. This is like how false Christians reveal themselves when times of persecution come. Pseudo-pro-lifers falter when someone tells them their pro-life vote hurts women, and so they end up voting pro-choice instead. These people have also realized that they will be held accountable for their views, and so they're finally motivated to come out as who they really are, pro-choice. That's why, at least for now, pro-lifers should focus on achieving success through state legislatures. This happened in Texas and Georgia, and the politicians that passed these laws did not lose their seats in the following election cycle, which shows protecting the unborn is not a toxic issue, even though some politicians act like it's toxic. There was a time when Democrats feared mentioning the A word, and Bill Clinton was successful because he argued for abortion to be safe, legal, and rare. But now pro-choicers have abandoned that language. They champion abortion as a good thing, and they see it as a helpful issue in political debates. But it shouldn't be that way, because killing unborn children is indefensible. Matt Walsh reaches a similar conclusion.
Alexei's main case, though, has been around abstaining from vote, so let's hear him talk about that.
I'll be arguing in this video that there necessarily comes a time when continually choosing the lesser of two evils is not a viable strategy. That if we want to influence the course of conservative politics in the US via that small power afforded to us by the vote, that we need to sometimes consider withholding that vote rather than letting these parties take it for granted. Let's start by noting that the least effective way to make your voice heard by a campaign is to vote for them, to effectively endorse all of their policies. The campaigns will naturally take a large percentage of voters turning out from a certain demographic or region as a sign that they don't need to change anything in order to get their votes. And again, it's not enough to merely complain about those specific policies with which you disagree and then give that party your vote anyways because you want to vote for the lesser of two evils. The only thing which will significantly move the needle is to hit them where it hurts. And this is more relevant than ever in modern American elections, which are increasingly won by turning out one's base to vote rather than appealing to moderates. In years past, it was a good general strategy for candidates to engage in a so-called race to the middle, to appeal to swing voters, people who reliably will vote for different parties election to election. But over the years, perhaps because of increased political polarization, increased exposure to information, or any number of other factors, the number of these persuadable or undecided voters going into the selection is at an all-time low. By way of metaphor, modern elections are unique in that they are not a decision between 1 or 0, Republican or Democrat. Rather, they're a decision between 1 and null, with 0 being pretty much unconscionable. Now, to conclude, I know that a lot of people watching this, if they bothered to watch this far, will have had the message of this video completely wash over them, and they'll just reply in the comments something like, "But Harris is so much worse." And again, from my political viewpoint, I of course agree. For these people, let me briefly restate my thesis. I'm simply arguing that in the long term, it is necessarily a losing prospect for conservatives to continue to vote for the Republican Party when they have proven themselves incapable of conserving anything for more than 10 years. Everyone is aware that the Republican Party of today is an extremely liberal party, and growing more so every day. If you agree with me that this direction is not good and will ultimately lead the country to a bad place, then at some point we must necessarily withhold the vote. The only question that remains is whether or not that time is now, or we want to wait for things to get worse.
I have a problem with this. Specifically, I have a problem with what this is missing. This is essentially armchair philosophy. You're implying that by participating less into politics in terms which the parties can measure, like the voter turnout, then you're going to have them change their policy into more of what you want. There are two aspects of your own video which go against that you shouldn't expect the party to change for the better if you do your course of action. One is its already existing tendency to liberalize. The party already moves leftward. So what makes you confident into thinking that when they see they no longer get enough votes to ever win, they won't tone down their message even more and appeal to the value system of the left to try to get some voters from there, to become even more of a copy of the left? But a more major element, which was in your video but I didn't include, about why this wouldn't work is that you already gave an answer for what helps politicians change their mind. They're donors. They're big donors.
Well, we can't say for certain why Trump feels so strongly about supporting Israel. Perhaps he has considered the issue deeply and simply determined that they're in the right. This author is a little bit skeptical that it doesn't have something to do with the makeup of his campaign donors, of which 30% of the top 20 are ethnically Jewish. This genuinely is not to suggest something nefarious. Rather, it's a simple fact which suggests a reasonable hypothesis as to why Trump supports Israeli causes so strongly. If a majority of his donors were black, I would expect him to focus much more on black issues and so on. People simply don't give hundreds of millions of dollars to political parties out of the goodness of their hearts.
You need to play a major role in the campaign of politicians to hope to change their minds.
Get down! I couldn't even follow that attack! It was almost instantaneous! Yep. Just gonna stand here and keep being awesome. There's nothing we can do against that kind of power. Hello? Awesome. Right here.
We're all gonna die!
You know what? All of you better duck. Because I'm about to turn left, and I don't want to smack you with my dick.
How are they ever going to know what you want if you play an even smaller role? Even leftists know that punishing their political party with not voting will just mean they don't get into office, which means they will not be able to implement any of their policies.
I just can't get over, like, guys, don't vote for the Democrats to punish them for Gaza, so that when they're in power, they know not to. Oh wait,
Leftists, man. And speaking of leftists, we know that they lost the election. Now let's see, how did they react to it?
And so what you've seen in the last couple of weeks, if this is an audition for managing a complex organization like the United States, Kamala Harris has passed the audition flawlessly. This has been, in many ways, a perfect campaign.
The most liberal thing about that is their use of the word flawlessly. The main message seems to be that the Harris campaign did nothing wrong. It's all the fault of stupid, uneducated Americans, particularly the racist, sexist minorities. It turns out many of the key Democrat-leaning demographics did not heed Harris's call to vote. Compared to Hillary Clinton and Biden, Harris lost a good part of the youth population. I guess she wasn't brat enough? Part of that could be explained by dissatisfaction with how the Biden administration handled conflict in the Middle East. It's actually a little surprising to see that Harris even lost female voters, despite all her efforts to appeal to them with issues such as abortion. Strangely enough, Harris performed much worse than Biden among voters who said they thought abortion should be legal in most cases. Which means abortion wasn't the deciding factor for as many people as Harris would have hoped. Probably shouldn't have put all those ovarian eggs in one basket. Harris also lost a lot of black and Latino votes compared to previous elections, making her voter base even less racially diverse than Biden's. This chart shows how most demographics, especially blacks, Asians, and Latinos, have shifted towards the right compared to 4 years ago. The only demographics that shifted left are people over 65 and white college-educated women. So obviously, this is a time for some deep introspection in the rank and file of the Democratic Party. Or, you could just blame racism and misogyny.
There were appeals to racism in this campaign, and there is racial bias in this country, and there is sexism in this country, and anybody who thinks that that did not in any way impact on the outcome of this race is wrong.
Democrats need to be mature, and they need to be honest. And they need to say, yes, there's misogyny. But it's not just misogyny from white men. Mm-hmm. It's misogyny from Hispanic men. Right. It's misogyny from black men, things we've all been talking about, who do not want a woman leading them.
Yes, blame the American people. That'll get them to vote for you in the future.
And those are not the only examples. Besides the earlier, minorities voted way more for the Republicans than usually. There's way more.
So this is a vote for bigotry, and this is a vote for misogyny, or this is a vote for racism, etc.
Now I want you to keep in mind that what you just heard and what I'll play next were said literal minutes apart.
I want to reassure, because I know that there are people out there who are worried that this is a statement, that this vote for Donald Trump is a statement of dislike of them. And I don't think that is what people should read into the election results.
Now, everyone familiar with American politics in the past few months know that the Democrats have escalated their rhetoric against Republicans continuously. They twisted words, took clips out of context, hallucinated bigotry and hidden meanings. I mean, literally last week, before the election, Trump made a comment about how war hawks should go on the front lines if they want to be starting wars, and pay attention to how the media presented it.
And I don't blame him for sticking with his daughter, but his daughter's a very dumb individual, very dumb. She's a radical war hawk. Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay? Let's see how she feels about it. You know, when the guns are trained on her face. You know, they're all war hawks when they're sitting in Washington in a nice building saying, oh, gee, let's send 10,000 troops right into the mouth of the enemy. But she's a stupid person. And I'd have meetings with a lot of people, and she always wanted to go to war with people.
Trump says Warhawk Liz Cheney should be fired upon in escalation of violent rhetoric against his opponents. Trump advocates 9 barrels shooting at Liz Cheney. Trump assails Liz Cheney and imagines guns shooting at her. Liz Cheney hits back at Trump's violent rhetoric. This is how dictators destroy free nations. This must be disqualifying. Harris calls out Trump's violent Cheney comments. U.S. Republican Liz Cheney slams tyrant Trump after he suggests she face firing squad.
Now pay attention to them gaslighting on the news.
The thing I think is most important to remember is the people who said that he was a Hitler lover weren't Democrats. They were Republicans. People who said that he was a fascist weren't Democrats. They were Republicans who worked for him. And so it's not just these elite Democrats over here, you know, poisoning the well. You had a pretty broad consensus from Chomsky to the Cheneys, that was very, very concerned and remains concerned. And so I think it's not just on us to stop calling names. I think it's up to him to, as Alison said, with deeds show that he's not going to be those things.
Well, that's not the only gaslight. Besides the gaslighting about their own actions, they did so as well for the economy, because they insisted that there was absolutely no problem during Biden's presidency until right after the election, when they had to blame something on Kamala losing.
Like, people like it or not, Donald Trump ran an issues-based campaign, whether or not his 2-hour stem-winder rally speeches covered all of it. It was mainly because of the economy and the beating that people are taking at the gas pump and in grocery stores, inflation, and immigration, and the fact that immigration, there is a crisis at the border. There has been for several years. The first couple of years of the Biden-Harris administration, they were in denial about it and acted as though anybody who asked about it was just reading right-wing talking points.
Both leftist ideas about the world and their accusations are to various degrees disconnected from reality, and they don't care about it. Take the accusation of bigotry, for example. They believe they're against bigotry, so when they're facing opponents, they assign to them support for said bigotry. This hypothetical bigotry that they fight also justifies their own vicious actions.
Over the 107 days of this campaign, we have been intentional about building community and building coalitions, bringing people together from every walk of life and background.
Okay, I'm going to be honest. Has anyone seen a more divisive campaign than Kamala's? Like, her campaign was way more divisive than Trump's. Like, basically, like, all the men in America just like revolted against. They were so deeply disgusted against her. They just revolted against her. If you went on Twitter and you looked at the stuff that people were saying about males, about young men, it was some of the most just hateful, disgusting, just horrific shit. Like, to be fair, I mean, to me, I'm used to seeing that kind of thing, so it doesn't really bother me. But if you're like a normal person, like you're just a normal dude, you're a normal conservative, and you just see these people like her supporters and her celebrity supporters just screaming like, fuck young men, we have to take everything away from them, they're just entitled, what we need to do is make them feel humbled, make them feel pathetic, make them suffer, take away their right to vote, like, and all that kind of stuff. Like, that was divisive. We had the whole, do you think Biden called half the country garbage, like, as a way to just fuck with her? I think that's quite possible.
I, for one, am holding hope that happened. That Biden saw the way he was treated after he was forced to step down from the election in a tweet, and he decided, you know what, I'm sabotaging Kamala. That would be beautiful.
But her campaign was super divisive. Like, and here's the thing, and this is why these people are all just massive F slurs. And why it's so gay and so fake, and why I hate it so much. They said during this campaign that Trump is Hitler. They said he was Hitler. They said he was Mussolini. They said he was Stalin. They said all these things. They said that there was going to be another Holocaust. They said that Trump was going to impose like a dictatorship. And these fucking Esslers, now that they've lost, are like, we're going to go, oh, well, I guess we just lost. It wasn't that big a deal. We were just joking about that. Like, if you honestly believe that Trump is Hitler, you wouldn't concede this. You would keep fighting this.
NBC News can now project that Donald Trump has won the state of Wisconsin, which means he is the winner of this race and will return to the White House as this country's 47th president. And for so many of you watching right now, that news is, to say the least, a lot to digest. I understand that personally. After he lost 4 years ago, he refused to accept the outcome and incited a violent insurrection on our nation's capital. He's campaigned while facing criminal indictments related to his efforts to overturn the 2020 results, and he's run as a convicted felon. During this campaign, he has also promised to essentially be an authoritarian leader, to use power like no American president ever has before, and wield that power to go after his political enemies. This is a man who's also bragged about overturning Roe v. Wade and stripping away women's bodily autonomy. He's promised to conduct mass deportations to crack down on the rights of millions of Americans. Donald Trump is an anti-democratic force, but he's just been elected democratically in our country.
But no, it was just all bullshit. It was just all like one big lie. And it's just fake, and it's gay, and it's just...
There were plenty of both messaging and reactions which were anti-male, anti-white. And here comes the thing. Given that there is a strong correlation between states with higher fertility and those who voted Republican, and that the campaign was mainly centered around protecting abortion, and the fact that, as a bonus, these people have these vile reactions against any sort of conservatism, can we just call the Democrats the pro-death party? There's more than that though. In their seething anger, many leftists, or at least those who got exposure in the spotlight of the current event, decided that out of spite they will give conservatives what they want, in the sense of abstaining from sexual relations, deportation, but only for conservatives. I mean, these people have no principle. They're projecting so hard that just because they don't really believe in the things that they say, that they think we don't, which is fantastic for us. Speaking of which, I'm making a brief intermission. The majority of posts you've seen in the background when I was talking in the past few minutes have been either from my community post or just feeds from various websites. But the community posts I'm making daily, twice per day, with memes of the similar caliber with this. So if you watched so far and you like my content, like the video, share it to people who want to see it, and also subscribe for the community posts and more videos like this. I'm trying to make them at least weekly to various degrees of success, and this video is part of the Creating Understanding series. My channel is axed around series, each with a particular theme. The theme for this one is thoughts which don't fall into the regular series with more thematic ideas, but are still easy enough to make weekly. In here is also where I'll cover most of the news. After I'm reaching 1000 subscribers, I believe I'll be starting some donor exclusive segments as well. Let me know if you're interested, help me reach that milestone, and enjoy the rest of the video. The hateful rhetoric of the left which I mentioned has more dimension than previously described. It is so profound, in fact, that if you're white and you're not already a major figure on the left, especially if you're a straight man, you will not be promoted by them. You are not there to hold any influence. You will only be there as an ally to work in other people's interests. You can only hold any resemblance of identity if you consider your identity to be entirely ideas, completely deracinated, because as soon as you care about your demographic group, they will call you a fascist and a reactionary as well. You will only have dignity as long as you're unassuming and docile and condemn the things which negatively affect them much more than those which disadvantage you. In fact, they will be perfectly happy if you consider the things which they claim harms them to be the things which harm you. They've proven that this is what they want for at least 50 years. We're now just close to the boiling point, where they cannot keep their mask on. There's also no coincidence that most major white leftist figures which are still around are either trans or in relations with them. Only those get promoted and accepted as having any sort of authority.
Ultimately, this can't maintain itself, right? What is the identity for young men inside the leftist coalition? There can't be any.
Well, and I think that the attempts to like the white dude or the Men for Kamala ad that you spoke about on Argent's show, right? This kind of like school marm, kind of like lecturing, but also vote for me attitude. I mean, I think that alienated an immense number of people, right? Like Walls in himself was sort of like a white minstrel show.
Yes.
Right. He was like, putting on the act like, oh, I like my mayonnaise tacos. I'm just a regular old white dad.
And everyone calls him coach, but he can't talk about football games in an accurate way, and apparently doesn't know the rules.
And can't load an actual gun correctly.
Yeah, he's supposed to be a hunter, can't load a gun, all of these things.
Yeah, again, it's that whole backfiring, especially it's the same thing with the whole white dudes for harassing. I think you said that on with Oren, right? Is that the left doesn't know how to do anything but portray white men as stupid and incompetent, and the only thing that they're good for is to simper for and bend the knee to the empowered women. So they can't portray, they can't come up with any sort of narrative that has white men and young men in any sort of position in their coalition that is anything above being basically a complete slave.
Well, and I think that really matters because, you were mentioning earlier, Dave, that it seems like this campaign was basically run by millennial women. And the logic would basically, like within the bounded rationality would be, now we've got this influx of young people who are social media savvy. They will deliver us, a great victory. And I think one of the big problems that the left faces is that they have no backbench talent, right? They have no rising up and comers to draw from. Okay, obviously they have people like the squad, what remains of them, although they're no longer looking quite as young and fresh faced. But to me, I feel like we got a trial run for the DNC backbench, and it went very, very badly. And so just as the MAGA movement is obviously looking for a successor, I think is an open question as to who runs the DNC after this, because as I'm one to say, the day of the pillow is fast approaching.
Yeah, the answer to that is obviously Gavin Newsom. But that's a short-term solution, right? Because Gavin Newsom is quite a savvy political leader, and he is the obvious successor to leadership in the Democrat Party. But long-term, how do you make more Gavin Newsoms? If I'm a young white guy and I'm like, yeah, I want to be who Gavin Newsom is, I want to have what Gavin Newsom has, that desire essentially makes you Republican. just expressing the desire to have the life that Gavin Newsom has makes you de facto right wing. In this stage of the progressive movement.
Dave is entirely right here. We're at the point where the only way to be a large figure on the left, if you're white, is to already have been so beforehand, like is the case for Owen Jones or... who's that guy who's not Owen Jones? Ah yes, Harry Sisson. Wait, your name Sisson, and you have those mannerisms? Oh, the universe is such a great comedian. Also, how come that Owen Jones is 15 years older than me, but he looks like he's 4 years younger? Truly, fiction writers of the past were right about the feminization of men in future centuries. For both of them. There are two things to note, however. Just as the left is facing a crisis in leadership, the right, at least the American right, is also in a precarious position because it's almost entirely driven by Trump. American right-wingers need to find a collection of people who will continue his aims after him. Do not think of it as acting instead of Trump, or taking his role as he is now, but working together with and as a follow-up. Additionally, it's become pretty clear that all wholesome values have a bias towards the right. Anything that relates to belonging, to wanting to preserve the past, to be part of a civilization that matters, these are right-wing goals at this point. A little more detail on that you will see in Chapter 8 of Lessons in Political Maturity 1.
To bring it to, a pop culture reference, and I think you brought it up a while ago, it's the fact that, Star Trek, the world of Star Trek is kind of the leftist utopia, yet it's filled with highly competent, aggressive men and masculine personalities that would be completely impossible to actually produce in a progressive utopia. How do you get, the French gentleman Picard who's a competent, basically a naval commander and, loves poetry and old novels? You can't get that with, and you look at what progressives are making now before the utopias even existed. How on earth could you get them to command a starship?
Yeah, that was always the joke in Star Trek is, but Picard represents progressive liberalism, but he is a function of an environment that is reactionary, whereas Q is advancing the reactionary ideas, but he's essentially exactly what progressives want to be. Like, he's an omnipotent being who can conform reality to his whims, and for whom the universe is just a playground.
And yet when all of his powers are taken away, he's terrified of everything.
Oh, I don't know if that particular episode. I'm just talking about the contest between him and Picard. But it's there's an inversion there that's kind of interesting. If you were one of my progressive colleagues, essentially these discussions were little LARPy professional wrestling bouts where the guy is designed to fold to you. The conclusion is predetermined. They have no idea how to function in an environment where an idea actually could be. And that's why it's so easy for them to cancel people, because they can't imagine being ideologically committed to an idea that's necessarily going to lose. They never had to stand on principle. Their ideas are completely aligned to the ideas that are promoted by the educational establishment. And you say, well, they've been pushing on open doors since FDR.
This election has been a pure demonstration of the earlier clip, because everywhere you look, the fact that they lost, they cannot process the fact that they lost. For leftists and Democrats, democracy is only when they win, and they win continuously.
Donald Trump is an anti-democratic force, but he's just been elected democratically in our country. And here's what might be the hardest part to hear, but we have to talk about and we have to say, and it is a hard part to digest for all of us. But we have to be honest about what we saw in this election. Donald Trump was elected by expanding his support over a number of key groups that we've been digging into this night, all night tonight as we anticipated where this was headed. And I know we're going to dig into it throughout the course of the day today. And there will be a lot of time spent on how and why he won and what this will mean for the country over the next 4 years and beyond. But in this moment, it's also important to remember that our democracy is not built around one person or one job. And I have every confidence that pro-democracy forces in this country will continue to stand up and make their voices heard. That's what we saw after 2016 as well.
Then the decisive result of this election gives us not just an answer to the question as to what Americans want to do along those lines, it also gives us a really big to-do list as Americans. If you are an American citizen who does not want to ashcan the American system of government, who doesn't want a strongman authoritarian system where the whole government is one guy and everything else just exists to serve him, if that is not the kind of country that you want, then yesterday's election means you have more to do for your country than you have ever done before. Because now is when the rubber really hits the road, right? We don't just flip a switch and the American system of government is gone. Democracy is gone. It doesn't work like that. I mean, not to be boring here for a second, but just getting very real. We now are just another one in the list of countries that has decided to, hey, what the heck? Let's try the strongman thing. Let's let democracy go. Let's put in an all-powerful guy instead, see how it goes. There are many more countries in the world governed by that kind of a system than there are governed by ours. We are the only 248-year-old multiracial, pluralistic democracy in the world. And shall we keep it? A lot of our fellow Americans say we shouldn't. Now we know. Now we know for sure. But a lot of Americans, tens of millions of Americans, say we should keep that system, which means time to fight for it. And yes, Americans did fight for it by working on this election, by trying to get the candidate elected who was both the Democrat and the small d Democrat. She didn't win. The strongman candidate won instead. But now history doesn't end. Time doesn't stop. Now we have the benefit of knowing how this has gone in every other country that has been through a democracy to authoritarian transition. And sadly, there are a lot of them. We have the benefit of seeing what's happened in those other countries, though. And what we know is that the more ground the authoritarian takes, the harder it is to ever get that ground back. And so the first order of business is to stop them from taking any uncontested ground right from the outset.
Oh, Mark. Don't be shy. You got exactly the leaders you deserve.
I'm your host, Stephen Colbert. Well, it happened again. After a bizarre and vicious campaign fueled by a desperate need not to go to jail, Donald Trump has won the 2024 election. Almost like you rehearsed that. The deep shock and sense of loss is enormous. Okay, but let's look at the bright side. This way, at least there'll be a peaceful transfer of power. All day yesterday, I was walking around proudly wearing my I voted sticker. Today, I wore my I am questioning my fundamental belief in the goodness of humanity sticker. Now, as a late night host, people often say to me, come on, part of you's got to want Trump to win because he gives you so much material to work with. No. No one tells the guy who cleans the bathroom, wow, you must love it when someone has explosive diarrhea. I wish, you wish, so many of us wish this hadn't happened, but that is not for us to decide. This is a democracy. That's democracy with a capital duh. And in this democracy, the majority has spoken, and they said they don't care that much about democracy. And I want to take a moment to congratulate Kamala Harris and Tim Walz on running an amazing 107-day campaign. Come on. That was extraordinary. Right out of the gate. They hit it right out of the gate.
People wanted change. And as much as Harris tried to present herself as someone who would challenge the status quo, she was the status quo. She said so herself.
Would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind.
That was the wrong answer in an election where people wanted change.
And change they got, and change they got indeed. However, for this change to not be unchanged, we would need to not rest on our laurels. We only have a foothold against the left. To turn it into a foundation, we need to think a little bigger. Currently, the members of the right who think that the Republicans and the conservatives and right-wing movements in general are too moderate are dissidents. And if you act like a dissident, you will remain a dissident. There has to be some point in which you say, how do we further what we have instead of what actions are being done against us? Sure, knowing that is good. After all, knowing your enemy is halfway on the path to winning 1,000 battles. Trump has been a big change, a probable end to the neoliberal and neoconservative eras. He and his voter base put doubt into the progressive narrative, both a greater distrust in media, the validity of the accusations of bigotry, the fact that migration can be used to control voting patterns, at least consistently. These are all disruptions which are favorable to us. Progressivism, after all, cannot survive on its own. You've seen some of that here. The coping, the hallucinations, the twisting of the facts in order to maintain a cohesive internal narrative. We subsidize progressive things into existence. Under normal circumstances, they would not exist because they're systemically opposed to reality. Take the following. Do you think someone with this attitude could be of note in a society which values competence and competitive spirit and virtue?
I think there are a lot of families out there who don't believe boys should play girls' sports.
They're not boys. I'm not going to listen to transphobia at this table. I am not going to listen to you call a trans girl a boy.
Are you going to allow me to finish my explanation?
When you use a word that's a slur, I'm going to interrupt. That's not how it is. They're not boys. They're not boys. They're not playing girls' softball. I'm not going to sit there and listen to that.
Let's reset for a second because, look, this is a really heated issue, right? And Sharmichael, I know you. I know that you understand that people have different views on this. I think out of respect for Jay, let's try to talk about this in a way that is respectful.
Okay, so let me rephrase this since I'm being targeted here.
I don't, you're not, just to be clear, you are not being
but
targeted.
I am, but it's okay.
I'm specifically saying that I know that you are not intending to be transphobic.
He should know that I'm not. But he wants to sit here and bloviate.
I'm saying you're using a phrase that you know.
And with Trump, we had increased discussion on the issue of migration. With Elon, we have the front of Afuera and reducing the size of the government. With Christopher Rufo and DeSantis, we have discussion on the plagiarism in academia, which favors the left. We have more discussion on anti-white issues. These are all victories which happened in the past 10 years. Sure, a conversation should never be the goal we set forth. But people thinking about these issues and knowing the words is important. In time, we'll be able to address even greater problems. Also, just as the situation in America is looking better, the situation in Europe, in some areas, is improving as well. We have victories of the AfD party, the center-right party in Germany, which... Overton window, let's be honest. And for the UK, I have a special guest today to tell us about the victories of Reform. As such, welcome Newsfist.
The Reform Party is, in some ways, the actual UK opposition party. Born out of the demise of the UKIP party headed by Nigel Farage. The last time they got close to electoral power, Farage essentially folded, told UKIP not to vote and gave those votes to the Conservative Party. After the Conservative Party refused to do anything substantial to stop mass migration, Farage revivified the Reform Party, which did quite well in the last election, but due to the structure of the UK proportional representation, first past the post system, Reform got very, very few seats. I believe they have about 5 seats in the UK Parliament at the moment. They are currently trying to do well in the next UK election in 5 years. Their main platform is the ceasing of mass inbound migration and counter-jihad, but they are hamstrung on this point due to the political environment generally in the UK.
You'll have to excuse the segment order because I made him make the introduction after the path for the future. So the introduction is only in the second part.
Hey mate, I hope this works okay. So as far as what Reform needs to actually do to sort of progress the ideas of the right, obviously they need to focus more on, things like British values, and they have been doing this, but they are fundamentally hamstrung by the environment that they are operating in. The Conservatives are also hamstrung by this same environment. A lot of the things that they would try to be using to sort of get a sense of nation bump up into things that they're not allowed to say. So fundamentally, the only things they can really use to sort of unify the country together are either the sort of CivNat idea that everybody in the country is English as soon as they step off, or they can try and sort of finesse it and say, well, you have to speak the language, you have to integrate. This is what Farage has been doing. But then you see they run into this problem of, well, who gets to integrate? How do you measure it? Any sort of suggestion that they might want to use some kind of like test to determine who is or who is not English bumps up against the walls that have been erected by the left that pretty much declare anything that isn't sort of everyone from all over the world who can come here and everybody who steps off the boat is immediately English is fascism. This is a real problem. And, I despair that Reform is not really going to be able to get anywhere because their definition of what is English is basically pretty much the same as the Conservatives and to an extent Labour, which is that anyone from the world can come to England regardless of their cultural or racial makeup and instantly be English. This is a sort of an attempt to do the whole MAGA thing in the UK. But the problem with the UK is that immigration has progressed to such an incredible state that social cohesion in many parts of the country has completely broken down. And there's no real way, in my opinion, there's no real path to victory for Reform as long as they are colluding with the communist people like Hope Not Hate, and as long as they can't come out and say stuff like, the English are a genotype and an ethnos. Now, I'm not saying they have to go hard and just be like, oh my god, right, we're going to get rid of everyone who isn't white and go the full fashion. Like, that's ridiculous. But as long as they can't even articulate what it is to be English, they're in a bit of a pickle, really. And I personally predict that Reform could suffer quite a crushing defeat in the next election. There are other parties, like I think the Homeland Party, and there are other sort of right-wing parties. There's I think what's their name? The Reform Party. No, wait, that's Farage's one. Reclaim, which is Lawrence Fox and all the Tommy Robinson people. But Tommy Robinson, of course, is now in jail. So I don't know how well it's going to go. I know you said you didn't really want me to talk about the communists and Reform, but unfortunately you can't really talk about Reform and talk about what it is that they should do without acknowledging the very, very serious barriers to expression that is around them. Reform is massively, massively hemmed in. And although I do understand sort of from Farage's point of view, he's like, well, look, we've got to play the game that we're with, and if we get anyone too extreme, we won't be close to political power. This is ducking the essential point that the path to power for anyone on the right is essentially co-opted and already controlled by a group of sort of what we call the Westminster blob, various sort of intelligence and extremist, anti-extremist interests that mean that, much like in Germany, where you have the situation with the AfD, they're just not allowed. Like, anyone to the right of the Conservatives is just not allowed to get into power. So the question of what reform can do well is hemmed in by this thing that they cannot actually respond to the wishes of their voters. In practice, what's basically happened is that reform and a lot of these other parties have just turned into sort of counter-jihad, really. Their whole point is basically sort of fighting radical Islam. But then they sort of sidestep the question of, well, why do we have radical Islam in the UK in the first place? And of course, the reason we have radical Islam in the UK in the first place is because of immigration. And the reason we have immigration is because of this boomer view that anyone should be able to come to the UK. Still, on the other hand, at least reform will be proud of British history, and they won't be the kind of party that will kowtow to any small island nation that basically comes to the UK and says, oh, because slavery, it's time for McGibbs, looting the country like a sort of Nike shop in the middle of a BLM riot.
Now there's one more thing I didn't mention so far, and that is that the elites wanted Trump to win. Some of you may be surprised by this, so I'll explain a little bit why. First is that, unlike his first presidency, they're not as unprepared as they used to be. They have a better idea of what his presidency could mean, and they could maneuver around that. The second aspect for which a Trump victory is advantageous for the elites is the fact that leftism cannot stay unconstrained. You've seen how they lost their minds earlier in this very video. The levels of insanity promoted by the left can become too overwhelming for those who are not members of the vanguard. And as such, for the general public, there needs to be periods of normalcy, in which a new status quo is established with the new victories of the left, a standard for what conservatives of the future will need to preserve. What we have learned from this election, though, is that the right wing approaches a period where they can no longer achieve the victories democratically, because democracy is increasingly turning into a bureaucratic system of pre-approval by oligarchs. You could, and people have, looked with 9-10 months in advance into what the likely outcome of the election will be, based on what the elites signaled to each other. You can see how to parse this information for yourself in this video. And to note, the right has to be careful to not take opinions of random nobody with a blog as seriously as more impactful institutional signals. We're now approaching the end, and besides reminding you again to like, share and subscribe, I would like to promote this video, this short I made of the July affair, the glimpse of luck which allowed this victory to be possible. You can sing along if you want. The last note I want to make is that you cannot wait for the perfect candidate, as evangelicals are notorious for acting like. Do you know what the most reliable path to doomerism is? Doing nothing. While you're there just doing nothing or getting informed on hundreds of years old documents, those who are acting against you are taking active steps for securing their place against you. And as such, when you notice them, they look too big to push back. If you want better politicians with better policies, you have to make them. This channel is dedicated to the making of the new aristocracy, teaching the lessons it needs both politically, culturally, civilizationally, and spiritually. And I hope that with your help, we'll get there. Currently aiming for 1,000 subscribers and monetization. Let's see how fast we get there. Ah yes, the channel outro for creating understanding. I see you. Have a nice week.